Hello and welcome to Watercolour Wednesday with me, Rebecca Jarman. I'm going to take you through another full painting in today's tutorial. This time it's an abstract zebra. He's really sweet. It's going to be a beginner class, so I will take you through all the steps you need to create this painting. Also included in today's class is a free PDF download. You'll find that in the description box below. Now, let's get started. So for today's class, you're going to need to download the PDF reference image, which you'll find in the description box below this video. Click on the link, download it and print it at home. And then you need to use the transfer technique, whereby you scribble with graphite on the back of the reference image, turn it over, lay it onto your watercolour paper and trace the lines through. If you're not entirely sure how to transfer the lines from the reference image, then I have a video for you and you'll find a link to that in the description below too, so check that out. So once you've transferred the line drawing onto your watercolour paper, as you can see I've done that below here, you want to secure with masking tape your watercolour paper onto a board, and then you want your watercolour palette and paints, 2 pots of water, 1 clean and 1 to wash your brush. And I have a selection of 4 round brushes from a number 10 down to a number 2, which I'll use for the details a little bit later on. I also have some kitchen paper towel. I also have a tea towel actually that I'm going to use to wipe my brushes on. It's very useful. And you probably want a scrap piece of watercolour paper. You can cut up an old painting that you're not happy with and use the back of that. This is so that we can test out the colours and ensure that we've got the correct ones before we start painting. Okay, so you want to choose your range of colours and it's entirely up to you what you go for. I have pulled out my old palette because I wanted a different range of colours for today's painting. So I've chosen to go with permanent rose, permanent rose, dark Zazine violet and turquoise, and we'll also be using Payne's grey as well today. So to begin with then, I want to set my paint up on the palette. I want 3 separate sections for the 3 different colours. So I'm just taking a pipette and transferring some of that water onto my palette. And I'm going to start off with the permanent rose. And we want quite a strong colour. So keep adding more pigment until you reach your desired strength of colour. So if I just test it looks really strong and dark on the palette, but as soon as you test it on the paper you can see that's very, very pale. So I'm going to continue adding more paint until I'm happy with the strength that I've got. So I tend to use a small brush for actually mixing the paint and picking up the pigment. Just find that it's easier, and actually you waste less paint that way, because now I'm going to go wash my brush in the water and I'll actually only be wasting a very small amount of paint because that brush holds a small amount on there. So if I just test that again, so it's a little darker than my first test and I'm happy with that. So the second colour I'm using is the dark Zazine violet, so I'm going to pick up some of the pigment and straight into that little patch of water that I put down on my palette, and I'm going to keep going again until I reach the desired strength of colour. So do it bit by bit and then you won't go too far. That's quite nice. Might just go a little stronger. We are going to use the wet in wet technique, so the paper will already have some water on it, so when you come to apply your paint, I'll show you a little bit later on, it will actually water this colour down slightly, so make it slightly stronger than what you actually want your paint to look once it's dry. And also remember that the paint will dry about 30% lighter on the paper once it's dry. So yes, so make it a little stronger than you think. And then the third colour is turquoise, which is absolutely beautiful. And I have just activated these paints a little bit before I started recording this video by dropping a few drops of water onto the dried pigment, and that just helps to activate it before you start. So I've decanted my paints out previously into my palette and then allowed them to fully dry. So that's beautiful. So if we test the turquoise, so you can choose obviously any colours you like. You might want to go for warm colours, reds, oranges and yellows, that would be nice. That's a pretty good colour, I'm happy with that. So those three are just great to get me started. Now we also need some Payne's Grey, so I'm going to just take another section on my palette and I know that this part of my palette is off screen, so just bear with me a second while I pick up some pigment. So just picking that up. And then test that as well. And that's quite nice. Yes, that's a good mix. So those are my four colours ready to go. So to begin with then, if you look at the reference image and then you've transferred those lines to your paper, there are a lot of stripes, a lot of detail, a lot of lines. And it's very easy to get lost as to which stripe you're painting and which one it corresponds to on the reference image. So the way I will approach this to to simplify it, should I say, is I'm going to start on the left hand side and work my way across the body first, so that I know what stripes I'm working on, and then I'll do the head after. So I wanted to make this zebra really colourful, hence the colours that I've chosen. But I also want them to blend on the surface across the stripes. So anywhere you see a black stripe, I will actually be painting it in a bright colour, or possibly the Payne's Grey as well. Anywhere that you see white, a white stripe on the zebra, that will remain white on my paper. Okay, so starting off on this left hand corner, that is the back of the zebra there, and I think I will begin with, let's see, I'm going to start off with the Dark-Sazine Violet. So what I want to do first of all, before applying any paint, is just taking a clean brush into the clean water, and I'm going to wet the area that I'm going to paint. And what that does is it allows me a little bit of extra time to apply the colour before the paper begins to dry. So what will happen is it gives me chance to get the colour down without creating any hard lines. So I've just wet that area and now I'm going in with the paint. And you'll find that the paint wants to run where the water has been applied. So make sure you're accurate when you pop the water down. Don't go into any of the white areas with the water. And you should get a nice even patch of colour without any kind of hard edges or lines. And there's also black that carries on around that patch of white, so I've just painted that in. There we go. So now that can dry and I'm happy, it's nice and flat. It's a really smooth, consistent wash. So the next stripe, if I show you the reference image, so I've just painted this area here. The next stripe along, you can see, is white, so I'm going to leave mine white and I'm going to paint the following stripe. And this time I want to start bringing in a little bit of my pink. So remember, so I'm going to clean off my brush and then I'm going to pick up the slightly larger brush that I'm using to apply the water. So this is a number 4 round brush. You need to apply it with a smallish brush with a nice point because some of these shapes are really narrow, and if you are using a big brush to pop the water down, you may well go over your lines and make a little bit of a mess. So to make it easier, just use a smaller brush, and I'm going to go into my pink. So that's the permanent rose, and I'm going to just fill that stripe. Okay, so that's nice and simple so far, but before I finish, I'm going to just quickly rinse my brush off and dip back into the purple, and I'm going to blend a little bit of that purple into the pink while it's wet. I'm just going to apply it at the top of that stripe. So I've got a bit of a transition now from the purple down into the permanent rose. Clean off your brush, and then again we want to leave the next stripe entirely white, and we'll be working on this stripe here. And this time I'm going to transition from pink at the top and come down and turn it into the turquoise at the bottom. So once again, going back to my wetting brush, adding clean water, starting at the top of the stripe and working my way down. So this is a bigger stripe, so it's going to use up more paint, and so you definitely want to pre-wet this so that you don't get any hard lines. So I'm not completely soaking it, there's no puddles on there, it's just a smooth application of water. If you look from a side, it's slightly shiny. And I'm going to start off with the pink. And I'm dragging that from the top of the stripe down. Nice smooth strokes. And I'm going to need to apply more paint because obviously the brush will only hold so much with it being quite small. So go back to your palette when you need to and reapply more paint. And go right to the bottom with the pink. So it's still slightly damp down the bottom, so that's good. So now I've wet that with the pink, I can wash off my brush, pick up some of the turquoise blue and pop in some of that turquoise, and it will just it'll splay or bleed if you like, it'll merge with that pink, and there we go. Okay, and what I'm going to do is go back into my pink because I want to make sure that that line there isn't too harsh, so I want a very gradual mix, a blend from one to the other. So if I lift up my paper to you, hopefully you can see at the bottom here there's now a gradual blend from pink to turquoise, and actually they've blended together and it's made a kind of a purple colour, which is fine. And then the next stripe, I want to use more of that turquoise colour. So clean brush and clean water. Back to the top. Now we're coming up to the edge of his nose here, so just be careful not to run any water across that line. All the way down to the bottom, and then I'm going to go straight into the turquoise, and you can see how vividly bright the turquoise is. It's absolutely gorgeous, and run that down to the bottom. And that stripe actually comes back up, that it attaches to the next stripe along. So I'm going to paint that blue as well while I'm here, so that I don't get a line where the two meet. So effectively I've painted this stripe here, and then if you can see, actually the white stripe stops at a point and the black stripes carry on and they join together. So I've painted both of those areas in that blue. And you kind of just carry on around the zebra in exactly the same way. You can use whatever colour combinations you like. I've restricted myself to 3 colours because I think if I go any further than that, it might start to look a little bit, I don't know, perhaps a little bit messy. And the colours all sort of link together, the pinks and the purples, of course. You've got the pink then blending into a purple, and then the purple and pink together, sorry, the blue and the pink together create a purple. So they all sort of work well together. And I'm going to start bringing in some of the Payne's Grey next. So as I work my way around to the front chest area, I'm going to gradually come into some Payne's Grey. So if I have a look back at the reference image, if you get lost, keep the reference image to hand, because it's actually this strange shape that we're going to be painting next, which is underneath his nose. So I'm going to go back into the purple here. So just, oops, there we go. Look, that was a dirty brush. So clean that off. Okay, and then clean water and just pre-wetting, as I did before, pre-wetting that area. Now I'm going to start off with the purple, so a little bit of purple on my brush. Filling the shape. And then I'm going to go into the Payne's Grey, pick up some of that Payne's Grey and touch it to the second half of the shape, so it starts to blend into a sort of a grey colour as it's moving round. So if I do a close-up of that, let's turn it round for you. There we go. So it's gradually transitioning from the lovely purple to a purple and Payne's grey mixed together. And the next stripe along, I'm actually just going to paint with the Payne's grey on its own. So that's my next step. So cleaning my brush and clean water. Filling in that shape and then straight into the Payne's grey and painting that on. And then exactly the same again for the next stripe. Wetting it first of all, clean water, remember. Payne's grey. I'm going to paint the Payne's grey at the bottom. I'm going to clean my brush off and go into the pink and paint the pink at the top. And then where the two meet, they can blend together. Okay, so then I get a different kind of transition. So pink to grey. Okay, and I'm going to carry on, but I'm going to speed the video up for you so that you don't get bored. Remember, you can choose any of your colours for any of the stripes. I just think it's nice to have some of the Payne's grey coming into some of the colours because I intend to use it on his ears and also across his nose, possibly with a little bit of colour as well. But it brings an element of that naturalistic colour into him. You know, obviously they would be black and white stripes. So we have a small element, a little nod, if you like, to what they would look like in nature. Okay, so I'm going to speed up the video and catch up with you soon. So a quick pause, folks, just to say again, thank you for joining me and I hope you're enjoying this class. I just wanted to remind you that this is part of a series called Back to Basics with me. If you've actually missed any of the episodes, I've put links below this in the description box, so please check those out. I hope you're getting on well with your paintings, and if you have any questions, use the comments box and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So if you're enjoying the class today, then give me a thumbs up, I really appreciate it, and also subscribe if you'd like to see more episodes of Watercolour Wednesday from me in the future. So I release a video each week and they all have step-by-step instructions, perfect for beginners, and let's get back into this class. Okay, so I've got the vast majority, well, all of his stripes in actually, and I wanted to show you a quick tip at this stage of the video. So if I just point something out to you, if you have any lines that are a little bit messy and untidy, this has happened here on my picture because some of the water that I put down before putting the paint down actually went across the line, and so I've popped the paint down on top, and of course the paint has run into anywhere that the water has landed. So a quick tip on how to rectify something like that on your own painting is to take this is a very tattered old brush, as you can see, but it has firm bristles, much firmer than my watercolour brushes. This is probably more like an acrylic brush, but you want a flat brush and clean water, and you just come to the edge that you want to tidy up and you sort of tickle that edge with the brush and press firmly down with some paper towel, and then keep going until you've lifted and tidied the edge. So keep pressing, keep sort of going backwards and forwards with the bristles along that edge and removing anything that you don't want on there. So it's quite a quick remedy if you have any sort of untidy edges, things like that. It was mainly just that one. Oh, this blue one here, I might try and lift a tiny bit there. So you can see I'm just sort of wiggling my brush. I'm putting some pressure down on that brush as well. And then sometimes depending on what colour you've used, it might take a couple of goes. Just bear in mind, be careful not to overdo it, because if you do, you'll start to remove the there's a coating on your watercolour paper, a primer, and if you do too much of this lifting technique, you possibly damage that coating, and also you might find that your paper starts to pill up and become rough, so you don't want to do that. Just put enough pressure down just to reactivate that paint, and then lift off with your paper towel. If you're not entirely sure on the method, just have a go with your tester strip. So I can actually quite easily, if I put this straight down, I could draw a line through that purple just by rubbing away and dabbing off. You can clearly see that has lifted the paint, and there's my paper towel. You can see the paint has come off on the paper towel there. So have a quick go on your tester strip if you've never done it before, and once you're happy with that, give it a go and tidy up any edges that aren't as neat as you'd like them. Okay, so that's a great tip for this class. So whilst I had completed the stripes on the zebra, I also placed a strip of masking tape across the top edge of my painting. Because this painting is much more square in composition, my A4 sheet is too long, so therefore I've just brought my masking tape up to the very edge of the transferred lines. And that's because I want to address the ears next. So looking at the reference image, we've got these lovely fluffy hair all over the mane of the zebra there in the center, really dark, and then you've also got fluffy hairs in both of his ears as well. So we're going to try and emulate that on our painting, whilst at the same time simplifying it a little bit as well for you guys. So I'm going to use the Payne's Grey, which I've used throughout the painting, but I'm going to strengthen it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and pick up, this is off camera, let me bring my palette across to you. Now my Payne's Grey is actually here, so I'm just activating that and popping it into my Payne's Grey mix here. And I'm going to pick up a bit more. And then I'm going to test it on my tester strip. If I put it next to the Payne's Grey that I was using originally, I can see how different it is. So it's a little darker, not much, so I'm going to add a little bit more paint. Okay. If you spread the paint out, you will get a better idea of actually what the coverage is like. If you just dab down a little spot of it, it looks really, really dark. That's no good. You need to spread your paint out on the paper as you would do when you're painting. And you can see there that we've got some of the white of the paper coming through. Okay, so another quick tip there for you guys. If you're dabbing it down and using little dots, then you're getting the wrong idea about what colour you've got in your palette. So yeah, spread it about a bit. And right, the next step then is we're going to stick with this wet in wet technique, mainly because we want lovely soft, furry, hairy patches of paint. And so this time I'm going to take my number 8 brush. Let's take my tiny one out. I'm going to take my number 8 brush for wetting because there's slightly bigger areas here, and then I'm going to actually probably use the same brush to apply my paint. So just into clean water first of all. And I'm going to start with the mane, which is in the centre of his, at the top of his head there. I'm just going to pop down that water. In that area. And this actually touches all those stripes of paint that we've placed down already on his forehead and down his nose. So that shape in the centre there, that's actually white fuzzy hair, so I'm leaving that. Okay, taking off some of that water and picking up some of my paint now. Starting at the top and letting the paint pool up and spread into that water. And if you use the tip of your brush to create jagged lines at the edges of this shape. So on the left here we've got some sort of spiky shapes happening where the hair is fuzzy, so you can use the tip of your brush to create those little shapes. So using the tip on the outside of the shape, picking up some more paint and pulling it into the center of the shape. So as I get to the other side, I'm going to turn my board around and do exactly the same again, using the tip of my brush to create those spiky shapes and then dragging the paint towards the center of that shape. And the beauty of using the Payne's grey is that it is a granulating pigment, so across this I'll have little variations of grey colour, which is really nice. That should help with the sort of the fuzzy feel to this. So if I show you a close-up, so hopefully you can see there that there are little variations in colour because it's granulating on the surface. Okay, so that's the main part of his mane. Now there are some shapes around it on the right here, so I'm just going to paint them in. They're very small and I don't need to pre-wet because I've got plenty of paint on this bigger brush and it won't take me long at all to fill in these shapes, so the paint won't have time to dry because it's going to be painted very, very quickly. You can just fill in those little shapes with that big brush there. Looking back at my reference image, okay, so I'm going to, there's a small shape just down here that I'm going to fill in with my brush without wetting, again trying to get some fuzzy texture at the edges of those shapes. And if I pick up enough pigment, actually, I think I'm going to attempt to fill in this larger shape as well, nice and quickly. Again, using the tip of my brush to get those edges in and then dotting in the rest of the grey. It joins up with this fuzzy, strange shape above it. A little patch of white in there as well. So if you use your reference image, it'll help you a lot. So you might get lost in some of these shapes, but obviously it doesn't matter if it's not identical to the reference image. Nobody's going to see your painting and the reference image at the same time, well, unless you show them, of course. But so, you know, just use the reference as a reference and then take it from there. So there's some light, lovely dark a rim, if you like, around the edge of that ear, which is nice because that's drawing the outline of the shape for us. And it's the same on the left, but I don't want to, if I start painting here, I'm likely to actually rub this wet paint with my hand. So again, I'm going to turn my board, and if you do this and you're still looking at the reference image as a guide, I'd recommend turning your reference image as well, and that will help you a lot. You'll understand what it is you're looking at, both your painting and the reference at the same time, because it can get quite confusing. So I'm going to, yes, there's a shape at the bottom, just filling that in. Again, just sort of using little dashes with my brush. Sometimes if they're a smaller shape, it's good to just use a broken line, just little dashes, and then fill in like that, and you'll get sort of a more natural feel. So you can use little dashes, and again try and get those fuzzy effects at the very edges of these shapes. With the tip of your brush. So if you put a lot of pressure on a big brush, obviously you're going to get a big smudgy line, aren't you? A large shape. If you put a small amount of pressure, you can draw quite fine lines. So just a little bit of pressure on your brush if you're doing those detailed bits at the edges. Try and create those furry effects. Don't want to put too much pressure on your brush there. And then you can fill in by dabbing the paintbrush down, and you'll get a little puddle of paint, a little patch of paint come off the tips and be drawn onto your painting. And if I look again, there's like a rim, a dark rim around that edge of his ear. So that draws that in nicely. And actually I'm going to bring this dark line to the bottom of his ear. I know it's not on the reference image, but I'm going to rub out any pencil lines afterwards, so it's going to make more sense if we draw it in with the paintbrush. There we go. That's great. So I'm going to turn the picture round and have a look at what I've got and decide if I'm happy with that. It's looking good, I think. I think I might put a few little dashes just at the base of that white patch, just in the centre there. Just a few little dashes there. And you can put in some extra little marks around some of these shapes too if you want to. And you just get a bit more of the sense of furry hairiness. But you can do as much detail or as little detail as you like. I'm happy with that. I'm going to keep it quite simple. Okay, so that's the top section of the painting completed, really. I'm not going to touch that again. However, I haven't painted his eye in yet. I wanted to make sure that everything else was dry first. Now, the eye needs to be the same kind of strength of grey as his hair on the top of his head and his ears. So this grey that we've just been using is perfect for his eye. And what I'm going to do first, just to be on the safe side, I want a really smooth wash across his eye. So I'm going to use water to begin with. And I'm going to be really careful not to paint the highlight in his eye. So hopefully you've traced from your reference, and you've hopefully drawn in that little triangle shape. If you haven't, get a pencil and draw that in now before you apply this darker colour. Okay, so I've loaded up my brush with the thicker paint. And I'm going to first of all make sure I go round that triangle, and then I'm going to fill in the rest of the eye. Just take your time, be nice and accurate here. Because the eye is really, really important. Whenever you're doing an animal, the eye makes all the difference. So I'm going to dot in a bit more paint so that it's nice and dark. And if that dries and it's still not quite dark enough, you can put a second layer of paint on the top, and we would call that a glaze. Okay, so yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, so I've zoomed you in a little bit now, and we're going to have a look at painting his nose. So we're going to use the same grey, Payne's grey again, and we're going to do the same wet in wet technique. So hopefully by now you've got to grips with that, so we should be fine. I'm going to take my number 8 brush, just cleaning it off, and I want to wet this area first. So this is going to take a little bit of time because obviously it's a much larger shape that we're working in. So just take a little bit of time to fill in all of those areas. And what I'm going to do is just paint the central section first, so you'll see what I mean as I go. So I've just popped enough water down that centre, and I want to make sure I distinguish his nostrils, so just filling that in with the water. And if you can't see, look from a slight angle. If I tilt this up, hopefully you'll see that there's a little soft sheen across that shape now. Okay, so I am going to use this number 8 brush, take some of that excess water off with my on my cloth there, and I'm picking it up. I may well have to mix up a little more grey as I'm going, but that's okay. So starting at the top of the shape, laying down this grey, and it actually comes up to some of those stripes as well, so make sure you are careful filling those areas in. There's actually a stripe here that I'm going to turn grey. There we go. I missed that one off when I was painting with the colours, but actually it looks nice grey, so I'm okay with that. And then there's lines that kind of come up. See, this area is starting to dry already. It's actually a really warm day here, so I need to be a little bit quicker. I mean, you can always wet again, so if I felt that this was drying really too fast, I can get my water down in this section and re-wet, but I'm just going to keep going. That's why I've got a larger brush, so that I've not had to keep going backwards and forwards. If you've noticed, I've not picked up any more paint from my palette yet because I've got plenty of paint on my brush here, and it's given me a lovely smooth application. And I'm just going to drag this, I'll just pick up a little bit more paint, drag this all the way down to his bottom lip here, and sorry, his top lip, not his bottom lip. I've left his bottom lip dry. I just want to add a bit more water. Now this area around here, around his nostril, I didn't wet, so I'm going to paint really quickly around there, add a bit more water to my brush, and make sure that's all filled in. So because I've added some more water to my brush, you can see that that's lightened the grey in that area, which is okay. I don't mind that. Okay, and now I'm going to thoroughly dry that area before I do anything else. I've got a little hair in there, but I'm not going to try and take that out now, because if I do, it's going to mess with the wash I've just put down and it'll leave me with a bit of a patch, and I don't want that to happen. I want to keep this nice and smooth. And I can see that this extra water that's down here is running back into my wash, so I might get some cauliflowers, but again, that's okay. I'm just tidying up this edge a little bit while I'm looking at it. Yes, so you can see very slowly this pale grey is being pulled back into the darker grey area. Now that's happening because this part of the wash is already starting to dry, and this part of the wash is much wetter. So that is being drawn up into the drier area. And that's when cauliflowers occur. They're sort of very organic shapes. But you know, I really like that about watercolour painting. So I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to let it do its thing. I'm not going to worry and go in with any more paint at this stage. The best thing to do when something like this is happening is just to let it dry and see what it creates itself. So I'll be back in a few minutes and we'll move on to the next step. So his nose, if I touch it, feels dry, and also it doesn't feel cold to the touch, so I know that it should be dry enough for me to paint against without it drawing any paint into that area. So I've mixed up a slightly darker mix of the grey, and I'm going to paint in with my number 2 brush. I'm going to paint his bottom lip. And it's on dry paper, so that the paint doesn't get watered down it doesn't get diluted by any water that we might put down on the surface. Because it's a reasonably small shape, we should be able to paint it without getting any hard lines. Okay, so that's the bottom lip in. Now if you look at the reference image, obviously the centre of his nostril here is very dark, but what we're going to do first of all is paint light grey in that space, the entire area, because the outer part of his nostril is pale grey. So we'll paint the entire thing in a pale grey. Once that has dried, we'll come back in and fill in that inner space with a dark grey. So I'm going to switch brushes. This one now is my number 4 brush, and I'm going to just add a little water to the grey I have in my palette so it's lighter, and I'm going to fill in this shape. And you should hopefully see your line, your guideline, through the pale grey, so that when you come back to paint the inner part of his nostril, you'll be able to use your pencil line as a guide to fill in that shape. This pale grey can also be used to paint his nostril on the opposite side. So just filling in that shape there with the same grey. So we must allow that to fully dry here before we come back with the darker inner part of his nostril. If we were to do it now, that dark colour would want to bleed out to his outer nostril, which, you know, that's not going to work. So we've got to be patient again. We've got to allow that to fully dry. That patch seems to be dry, so I think we're safe to paint. It's been about 5 minutes or so. Again, like I say, it's really warm today. If I have a look, it's 18.5 degrees in this room, so nice and warm. So it's helping me to speed up the painting process. It's drying nice and quickly. So I've just got my number 4 here, and I've got the thicker mix of Payne's grey, and I'm just painting in that shape of the inner part of the nostril. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, that's okay, that's nice. What I do like about the reference image is that there's some texture on his nose here. I realise he's got whiskers, but I'm not going to paint those. But I do like the folds in his nose and sort of the texture. So I'm going to try and emulate that on the painting. Now we've painted that dark section here, I need to be careful not to paint up to that area. But looking again, actually, I've just spotted that underneath the nostril, it's very dark under here, so I do need to get some dark paint in that area. It's sort of a shadow, isn't it? A cast shadow. So I need to add that, and then I want to try and add some texture here on the front section. I think I'm going to do that with a little bit of colour. So looking at it, I think the purple's going to work nicely on his nose. So first of all, let's add some of the shadow on the underside there. So first of all, what you want to do is wet that section so that we don't get a hard line where the shadow sort of fades away. We want it to fade out nice and soft. And I also don't want the shadow to be too dark, so I'm going to go into the original mix I had and just dot it down underneath that line, and you can see it sort of spreading into the water. If I bring that around a little bit, and just dotting it on, tapping it on with the tip of my brush, and that will continue to spread as it dries. So I don't really want to add any more paint now because I think it's going to move far enough, and I believe it's got, you know, enough depth of colour there to show that it's a cast shadow. So I'm much happier there now. Yeah, so when it comes to adding some texture here on the nose, it's the same method. I'm going to pre-wet the surface and control where the paint goes. So just taking my number 8 brush, and I'm going to wet this section, obviously not wetting anywhere near the dark nostril there. Bringing it down to sort of the edge of the top of his lip. Clean off my number 4 brush, and I'm going to go into some of the purple paint, and I'm going to tap it down and let it spread. Now I'm going to clean off my brush, dry it off on my cloth, and I'm just going to manipulate that bit of paint a little bit and allow it to go sort of where I want it to. So I'm just moving it around with the tip of my brush. So you can see some of the grey through that, which is fine. Getting a bit of clean water, and I want to soften this edge. It's very difficult for me to describe what I'm doing, so I'm trying to soften some of those purple patches now by bringing it up a little bit and spreading it out a little bit so that it's fading out, if you like. Okay, I think I've got some more very pale purple on my brush now, and I'm dotting that in. So that area was damp, so this is going down nicely, but this was slightly paler. So that first lot of paint was quite dark, wasn't it? Quite vivid. And I'm just going to come round, bring some of this purple round into the shadow area, using this dotting technique. So it's a bit like stippling, I suppose you could say, but it's allowing some of the purple to come round and spread into that area of his mouth, his nose. Just making sure that it's coming, that purple's coming right to the edge of the shape. And I've got a bit of a water line, so I'm just going to add clean water to where that line is forming, and I'm going to wet that whole grey shape, because what happens is you put water down and where it ends, if you like, you get like a tidal line. So if you fill the entire shape, then the tidal line effectively becomes the edge of that shape, so therefore you won't notice it. There we go. So now we've added a little bit of colour to the end of his nose, and I quite like that. I think that's nice. Just spread that bit of dark purple around a little bit. That was getting quite, it's much more subtle now. Yes, I'm happy. When I first placed the purple down, it was a little bit too overpowering. I wanted it a bit more subtle. So adding the extra water and then helping it spread across the surface using that sort of stippling technique has enabled the purple to blend into the grey a little bit more. So that's lovely. I'm happy with that now. So if we look again at the reference image, there are some little lovely wrinkles in there. So I'm taking my really small brush, this is my number 2 round brush, with the grey paint, and I'm just going to draw in a couple of those wrinkles. And a broken line is probably the best for this, so that it's not too harsh. Let's have a look. So I might bring one in just around there. It's very, very pale, but I think if it was dark, it would just stand out way too much. So keep it subtle if you can. I'm just trying to see where I didn't draw them in, so I'm kind of looking at my reference and trying to work out roughly where these lines are. They're lovely wrinkles. And also I don't really want to overdo it. And I'm going to look from a distance, so that's a really good tip. If you stand away from your painting, have a look from a distance. Okay, yeah. We've got some sort of dotty texture as well. Let's get some of that in. I suppose these are probably caused by his whiskers and things. Like I say, I'm not going to be painting whiskers in. If you wanted to, I would suggest actually a little white pen might be a good idea. And there's also some little dots texture around his nose. we can pop them in. So this is my number 2 brush. It's really, really fine. There's some dots around the top of here, the nostril. Don't want to go overboard. We don't want to make it a dotty picture, but just a little bit, something quite subtle helps just define the shape a little bit, you know, and describe what we can see here. Now I know there's sort of a light area on his nose, but I'm not going to lift that away. I think I'm quite happy, I think, now with the way this is looking. I don't want to make it too complicated either. So we're keeping it simple for you guys, for you beginners. Hopefully this hasn't put you off this area. We've focused on this area quite a bit. Now what you could do is ignore the purple. You could just stick with the grey. Don't worry about adding purple in there if you want to simplify it. Don't worry about the wrinkles or the dots. Just get the basic shape down, and actually that looked quite effective as it was anyway. This is quite a graphic painting, so it would look perfectly fine without this extra element of detail on it. So there we have it, our finished zebra painting. He's really sweet. I'm dead pleased with him. I may well cut my paper down a little bit at the top because obviously this is A4 and it's a different kind of composition. But what I will suggest you do is, if you have a look, you can still see the visible pencil marks on the edges of the white stripes on him, and what I will be doing is actually removing those with a putty rubber. I hope you've enjoyed this workshop with me. It's been a really fun one for me to do. I'm so pleased that you've stuck with me to the end, and I'd be really happy to see your zebra paintings. So if you want to send me one via email or possibly on my Facebook, I have a page, Rebecca Jarman Artist, if you have a look out for that. You can join my my specific group as well. I have a painting group on there. Have a look for that. Thank you for joining me today, and check out my next video, which will be released next Watercolour Wednesday. Take care, folks. See you again soon.